Hey everyone, welcome to Module 11. Just a couple announcements and then I'll get into the usual business. So just be aware that I am posting Module 11 on November 19th. So that's the start of your break. So there's no expectation that you should be working on things during the break, but I wanted to post it there in case someone wanted to work a little bit. Be sure to care for yourself though, take a break from school, attend to family, friends, personal life. But I just wanted to let you know that it's there. And that's kind of why. Uh, as well, be sure that if you haven't looked into my video that I posted in the announcements, as well as it should have been emailed to you about the final project, personal model of counseling paper or presentation, please thoroughly look through that. Look through the syllabus. I made changes to the syllabus to make it a little bit more clear how theory is supposed to be integrated in there. So let me know if you have any questions. Okay, so just a few reactions from the discussion board. I first wanted to address compliments from solution-focused brief therapy. So compliments are kind of a key part, or can be a key part of solution focus, but they're not overused. That it just doesn't become like, oh, I'm just trying to always build up my client. It's often that they're used just when it's felt very genuinely, when there's kind of a reason that would be helpful to target that specific compliment. And also at the end of the session, when you're summarizing, giving a compliment, then it going over homework. So I just wanted to encourage some thoughtfulness of when to use compliments, because it wouldn't need to become more of like, oh, always this dynamic of building the client up necessarily. So I also wanted to go over the miracle question and scaling question. So just briefly, so the miracle question can sometimes flop. I've used it before and it's flopped big time because I just said, if something happened in the night and a miracle occurred, like what would be different in your life? How I worded that there was too vague. So then clients would just start saying, oh, I'd have $1 million, I'd have a new house, like everything, like, so they just went to this really grand idea. But Insoo Kim Berg, I've watched a video of her recently, and she would say, let's imagine through the night that there was a miracle that occurred and like and your problems were gone. Like when you woke up, how would you start to notice going through a typical day? How would you start to notice that the miracle happened? So that question is very different than what I first asked, because it starts to say, what are the small things that would be clues that things have gotten better? So she did this with a family client, and one of the family members said we'd eat dinner together or we'd eat breakfast together. We wouldn't be arguing. I'd be getting some help making the breakfast. So just like these small micro changes that become more manageable, that then you could kind of pick up on and say, okay, which one of these can you actually start doing? So yeah, I just wanted to provide a little bit of clarity of how to get a little more specific there. And I think that's the intent of scaling questions too. If the family's saying like on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being we're fighting all the time, with 1 there's no fighting, where there's complete harmony. If they're at like an 8, you might say, oh, what helped you get to an 8? You're not at a 9. So something's, going well enough to be at an 8. After you process that and figure out what those exceptions of what's kind of helping them not be at a 9, then you can kind of take the step to what would it look like to move to a 7? What would the small shifts be to go there? So once again, the idea is that solution-focused counselors often get very specific into the nuances of change. So really quick, I wanted to address objectivity and narrative. So a few referenced how externalizing the problem in narrative, so separating the problem from the client, can kind of help the client more objectively see their story and that problem. And I think in a sense that makes sense, but I kind of want to address a few just reactions I had. So I'm not saying that's necessarily wrong, but just remember though that narrative is based in postmodern thought. So postmodern thought is that there isn't really an objective truth. There isn't an objective way of seeing an issue. Maybe it helps the client see with greater clarity. Maybe that's what objective could mean in this context, that it's being able to see the issue, have enough distance to see it with more clarity. But really, it's also about language. When we change the way we communicate about the problem, it almost can diffuse the power of the narrative. The narrative no longer has power over me. It isn't me. It's a separate construct. So then it's less about self-judgment. It's more about diffusing the power and restorying, deconstructing. I think that's an example of like through the language, that's how we begin to deconstruct the story. Okay, so kind of on a different note as well, continue to work on connecting theory to practice, especially with this course ending soon. It might kind of be like, okay, we've just covered a lot of ground because we have lots of general principles, but it's kind of your task to start to figure out how can I learn more about these general principles from theory, but then how can I make the link? How does it apply on the ground? And it usually helps to read from some of the key authors who wrote, so if it's narrative, maybe you go to Michael White. If it's person-centered theory, you go and read some of Carl Rogers' works. So getting a little bit more specific into the how of the theory can kind of help you make that link from theory to practice. Last comment before I go into family systems theory is I posted quite a few different videos this week. There are a lot. One of them is kind of long. It's about an hour of Carl Whitaker that I was able to find on YouTube, but the rest of them are kind of brief excerpts, kind of small interventions to show of what it might look like to work with a family. The Old Dominion videos, Old Dominion University published videos that we usually view don't have family systems theory, so I just kind of found some approaches on YouTube and some small excerpts. So that's why, there's no expectation to view every single one. Just kind of peruse that and view some of them to kind of get an idea of what family systems theory can look like in practice. Okay, now I'm going to go into some of my reactions on family systems theory. All right, everyone, now I'm going to be talking about family systems theory. And this looking at systems theory is a completely different vantage point than all the other theories that we've been talking about so far. And you're going to be taking a class that's like the family counseling class, where you're going to learn more about the different theories that are specifically applied to family systems. So this is just a small snapshot, but I think it's really exciting in a lot of ways. So for example, just family counseling or couples counseling, or just integrating other members of the system in with either a client, or can bring up important things. But at the same point, I think one important key question to ask from the start is, who is the client? When you're working with the system, who's the client? Do you have, like, if there's a family of 4 members, or do you have 4 clients? And the answer is no, you have one client. The family is the client. So this is just the shift of perception that needs to occur when you're working in a family system or a couple lens is, how can I see this system as, an integrated body that's trying to find peace? So hopefully a few examples will kind of clarify what I mean by this, but I think a few advantages also of taking, of seeing the system as the client is when you have the family present together, you see the interaction in the moment. So instead of the client talking about, what's happening outside of the session and the problems that are occurring in their life there, it's usually pretty present. Like, you see the dynamics playing out. So for example, I was doing couples counseling once, and they were kind of like trying to figure out, how loyal are they to each other? How committed are they? They weren't married yet, but they're considering it. But then one member was considering like leaving the relationship, and it was almost like there's this dance of one member would want to like become distant, the other would follow. And so we were able to like see that playing out, either through like one person just kind of leaning back like this and kind of disengaging, and like, so I was able to call attention to the dynamic in the moment. Oh, you're disengaging right now, you're almost pulling away, and he's trying to chase after you to get you to come back. So once again, seeing that and being able to name those dynamics and then process them shifts the dynamic. Then they're not just kind of stuck in this cycle, this circle, which I'll talk about in a moment, but they're able to kind of break it and maybe make new choices based on that insight. Another key thing about family systems is the emphasis on homeostasis. So the idea is that a system wants to regulate itself. It doesn't. So like if one member of the system changes, that puts the rest of the system in a state of, kind of chaos to a certain extent, not major chaos, but it means like, oh, this one thing's changed. So we want to like get that member of the body and bring it back in so that we're at peace again, so that our norms are reestablished. So it's almost like the status quo is the goal. So there's this pull towards equilibrium where, okay, we can satisfy as is. So you can kind of see though that making changes in one member can lead to systemic changes if that change can persist. Or working with all the members to be able to get enough buy-in to be able to regulate that chaotic reaction in a new way is important as well. So this kind of leads to circular causality. So circular causality is this idea that, I guess this is linear. Like there's sometimes in counseling this linear belief that if A causes B, So A, something happens, and then B is the reaction. Well, that might be like some certain like CBT principles, but there's a shift in like a systemic lens or systems theory lens is that circular causality is that A doesn't cause B and B doesn't cause A. They both play into each other. So for example, I was seeing a client and his dad would just get him ticked off. So the dad would like come try to see what's going on. So this child would get, he was 14, so this teen would get really escalated and really angry, and then the dad would try to come closer to him to like work on the issue, but then the son would get even angrier. So it was almost like this situation where if the son was angry, the dad would get closer, then he'd get angry, and the dad would get closer. So it's like they're both feeding off each other's reactions. So one of their reactions wasn't necessarily a problem, but just the fact that they're put together in a way that they both led into each other was important to note. So one of them had to break the pattern. So that actually happened in session. I noticed that, so the teenager, I could see that you're getting angry right now. Your walls are starting to go up. You're wanting to disengage from your dad, and he's getting closer and wanting to like understand you, and that's leading you to get angrier. That kind of helped him like regulate and recognize, oh, yep, it's happening in the moment. So I guess, on shifting to another lens, systems theory also, you could start to you start to look for what are the rules in this system, the unspoken rules. Usually what are those unspoken rules that are playing out, the traditions, the norms, the patterns in this family system, and noticing those are really important. So for example, the use of a genogram was talked about in the Corey text. So genograms can kind of help you see what are these transgenerational patterns, these patterns that are playing out through the generations in a family tree. So in my family, like on my mother's side, a lot of the men have been kind of conflict avoidant. I think most everyone actually, but it's noted in that tree that like a lot of times there's men who avoid problems in their marriages and then they kind of deteriorate. Uh, and I've noticed that like I had to become aware of that myself, that there's an element of conflict avoidance inside me that I had to really wrestle with when I was going through the counseling program in particular, and being able to recognize, that conflict avoidance really just does lead to avoiding of the problems, then it boils up and becomes bigger and kind of it's self-destructive. So being able to see that, how that played out through generations, was important to my growth, and I'm still making sense of that in some ways, of how that manifests. And sometimes like, oh, there it is again, there's that conflict avoidance inside of me again, that's surfacing in a new way. So once again, those recognizing that a system isn't just those who are living, but there's generational dynamics that are playing out too. So that can be a big part of systems counseling, and the systems theory is like, what are the layers, the complexity of this system that you're working with. Just so one technique, I guess a couple that I'll bring up here, but one in particular that was mentioned in the text. Obviously, this text was just really high level techniques, because each theory in like the family counseling class will have their own unique sets of techniques. I guess the genogram is one technique to actually use that with the family client that's in front of you. But circular questioning is also helpful. So it's basically, questions that roll between the members that kind of see that it elicits multiple vantage points of the issue. So for example, a circular question might be, maybe if the father figure and the daughter like kind of are experiencing some friction, the counselor might talk to the son, like another child, and say, so when dad gets mad, how does your sister react? So it's not to like turn people on each other. The intent is like, how can we get everyone's perspective here? It might be just be like, oh, this is just a dad daughter thing, but maybe everyone else is playing into that too by staying silent. That's a role. Their silence is a role of kind of not getting in the middle of something. So it's just kind of, and how they see it is important too. So it promotes like a system level involvement, a transparency and awareness of making sense of what's occurring. and really circular questions help to bring the emphasis on the process rather than the content. It can be really easy in family or couples counseling to get focused on, well, this person said this person said this, like they're irritating me this way, they're driving me nuts this way, just kind of get stuck in the story of what's happening. But you kind of need to pierce through that too. uh, what's the process occurring? How do we talk to each other? Why are we kind of escalating in certain situations? uh, so yeah, it's less about, it's kind of noticing like, oh, I see it can be the nonverbals too. Your arms are closing up when they're talking about this topic. Something inside you wants to back away. uh, so yeah, I also felt like in the Corey text on pages 413 and 414 were some great questions that are really process level type questions. I want to go to it really quick. uh, yeah, there's just a big bulleted point, not big bulleted point, but multiple points that are great process questions. And one example is like, what are the goals of each family member? I think that's a great circular question. So you can kind of get like, maybe they come in for counseling, they know that they need to work on something, but they all have a different perception and an interpretation of what that even means and looks like. Uh, so maybe the last thing that can be a form of an intervention is triangulation. A lot of times in a family system, there triangles will occur. It's almost like maybe uh, sometimes it's even like the one of the parent figures and child figure are almost like loyal to each other against even the other, partner, the other parent figure. So like they're on a team and someone else is excluded, or it could be like they want to, maybe there's friction points between the partners and they want to pull the child into it. So the child becomes the emphasis of the friction rather than needing to deal with their actual, the spousal friction. So triangles are actually pretty fascinating to see in systems. So this even happens. I think my father-in-law would be happy, or he'd be totally open to me sharing this, because so my father-in-law and mother-in-law are both actually counselors. They both did a master's in counseling program, then went on to do some other things. But so they're very aware of these dynamics. And sometimes I see them kind of arguing about something, that my father-in-law will look over to me and be like, "Hey, well, Kirk, what do you think about this? Like, this is right, right?" Like, and then I just say, "Hey, I'm not going to get triangulated into this." And he laughs, recognizing, "Oh, yeah, I'm trying to pull you into our thing to like maybe relieve some of the tension, or to be an escape, or to be an ally." Uh, so it's kind of interesting how systems want to encourage more involvement and get other people in there to maybe relieve some of the tension or help kind of with loyalties and ties. So yeah, these are a few of the, I guess, the core reactions, some of the core constructs, some of the kind of high level interventions. But this theory could just be really important to recognize as as you're finishing all of the core, kind of more individual style uh, theories of counseling. This kind of opens you up like, wait, there's more, there's another class. And you'll also see like how CBT, how narrative, how these solution focused, they're all going to be applied to family counseling as well. So you'll learn about that later. But yeah, I hope this maybe sparks some reflection points, and leads to more thoughtfulness on your end. And feel free to reach out to me if you have questions.